Just a bit about DRIVA. It's a £1.6 million research project from the University of Brighton, funded by the European Regional Development Fund and Arts Council England. They're focusing on sparking a superfusion of creativity, technology and business when using data as a tool. Participants in the programme have exclusive access to Gatwick Airport's real-time data, as well as a range of support, expertise, events, funding and training from the University of Brighton until the end of this year. So everything that you need can be found at drivaartsdriva.com. So I'd encourage you to take a look there, and there's information about other events as well. So moving on to today's webinar, databases, citywide safety through crowdsourced data. And we are delighted to introduce Jillian Kowalchuk from Safe in the City. Jillian is an award-winning entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and is the founder and CEO of Safe in the City, an AI street smarts app for safe navigation. She sits on the Commonwealth Businesswomen executive team to empower girls and women into business, and on the Department for International Trade's Global Entrepreneurial Programme Female Founders Advisory Board. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jillian.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. I think at any government, there's some really interesting long-winded titles there, so I know that can be a little bit painful to get through. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time and your interest in this particular topic, event. I really want to make this also valuable to you. So very much want this to be, we have an intimate group. Let's make sure that we kind of get to know each other as much as we can. As Bonnaby mentioned, we will take a few different breaks along the way so that we can kind of create a group discussion. And I know, this probably would have been a lot more engaging in person, but let's see what we can do with some of the tools in the chatbot. There are also some reactions that you can do if you do need some help. I can show you how to do that. So yeah, I would like to start with sharing a little bit more about Safe in the City. And let's just start by taking a kind of a moment. We're in a very challenging climate where safety is a word that we hear and are kind of thinking about quite often. And I would challenge you to think about your personal life and whether you've had these discussions with people in your network, your loved ones, friends, colleagues, to see who do you think has felt unsafe in the city, whatever city you're in, if it's Brighton or if it's anywhere else in the UK. So maybe let's just kick off with a little bit of engagement here. So if everyone can find the chat bot, can you put a yes or no if you've felt unsafe in whatever city you're in just in the past month, whether that was somebody that you thought was maybe following you, maybe somebody that's said a comment, maybe a crime that you witnessed or experienced yourself. Could everyone just pop in the chat if they've had an experience? Okay, a few months ago. Thank you, Tala. All okay for you in Brixton, Stanza? How about Nigel or Donna? Aggressive street drinkers in Wathing. Okay, yep. A lot of drug deals, North Lane area, minor traffic stuff, but in Brighton. Okay. So the point there was to show how frequent these types of experiences are. And, I think we have a pretty evenly split group, but also to look at when I run this, usually we put our hands up and there is a discrepancy between different groups of people, be it people who identify as women, people who identify as transgender, different ethnic backgrounds, maybe someone with a visible disability. There are different experiences of safety that we have to appreciate. And actually how that shapes in our cities. So one of the co-founders of Hollerback, Emily May, was really a pioneer in this space of mapping street harassment particularly. And when she was actually designing this 15 years ago, herself and her co-founder, who's male, basically said to her, we're practically the same person, but as a male, I feel that we actually come from very different cities, even though they were both based in New York City at the same time. So how can we experience places so differently? And I want to get into a little bit of my personal experience and share a little bit more about you. And again, kind of some of these similarities over kind of these different places I've been to, and recognizing that safety is experienced differently. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I came up with Safe in the City. As you can tell probably from my accent, I am not a local. I am originally from Vancouver, from Canada, and originally came over to complete my master's degree in public health and epidemiology. And when I moved over permanently to London, I used navigation apps, the ones on your phone, the Google Maps, the city mappers, to get around the city, to explore, to meet friends, to, check out different areas. And I think with the lens of public health, it really started to give me a new outlook of what technology was actually designed and providing. So for me, I started to notice that these different areas I was walking through, being guided through these technology products, actually didn't feel that they were designed with myself, a young woman, a newcomer in mind. And one particular night, I was using my navigation app to Google Maps to get to a place in Soho, London. And it took me the fastest way, which happened to be through an alleyway. This was quite a frightening experience because I ended up going down this alleyway and being threatened with sexual assault by two men who blocked my way, and it became a bit physical. And luckily, I was able to get out of that situation in the end, but I couldn't help but think about that person or people who would just continuously be following this algorithm, taking a navigation app, not knowing these situations that they might be walking into, and that patterned behavior that could have been prevented, in a sense, is just missed. And that was really one of the aspects that inspired me to create Safe in the City. And then how we can use technology while we're moving through different spaces to really start to shape the cities and spaces that we want to be in. So next slide, Barnaby, please.
Okay.
Thanks. So my passion's always been about helping people. I've been fairly well traveled and very privileged to do that, but I think it started really with one of my earliest experiences. My family and I moved to Yemen, which is classified as one of the poorest nations in the world. Actually currently is in the face of extinction because of a number of crises, famine, different wars that are happening. And I think as an expat child, Canadian, I really started to understand, even from a childlike perspective, this inequality that existed of, why can't we just give them our money and then we'll all be happy type of, wonderful childlike things that we used to, you see the world in. And I think that especially when we unfortunately had an experience where a civil war broke out and we had to flee, it really also marked in me that we'd left behind so many amazing people that I'd become friends or were almost like family members to me. And this really helped shape my journey of becoming an equalitarian to a certain degree. And I think by being in these different types of environments, it really gave me lens to want to do a lot more, not only to help kind of individuals, but also looking at how is this shaped by the masses? So that was where the spark of my background in public health came to be. I have a prior degree in psychology, so it kind of shaped by kind of understanding more at the individual level, and then started to broaden out at a sociology and a public health model. And essentially, I think these are the three keywords: entrepreneur, epidemiologist, and equalitarian, that really shape and design a lot of the different things that I've been involved in. And I really want to take this time, this is your, precious time as well, to really leave with you that something to inspire you, especially when we can use our talents towards aligning our focus, energy, and time with other like-minded people to become an unstoppable force. So again, I want to make this interactive, so please do jump on the chat. We have Dan and myself and Bonnaby looking at this, so you'll be answered quite quickly, and we really would like to shape this and steer it in the way that you guys would like. Great, so next slide.
Sorry about the delay.
No problem. So again, let's go back to kind of understanding safety. So these are probably terms that you're quite familiar with in terms of public safety, and the things that are just almost inbuilt, when you go into a new workplace, you'll have the fire procedures and really know a lot more about kind of where to escape, what to do in different situations. You might have a disaster protocol at your school or university if something was to go wrong, including a terrorist threat. And then we know that, we have institutions like the police that are based on crime for us to, call up or get in touch with someone to help with the situation. As well as we also have these fundamental rules around violence and, that we can't treat each other in these types of ways. And then if you can click on the next slide, Bonnaby. Mm-hmm. But then on the other scale, we have personal safety, which is a lot more of a gray and in some way a lot more subjective, because we're not now tailoring to the masses. We're now having to segment groups or make decisions based on different people. So, for example, hate crimes, what are hate crimes and what do they look like? Is it only racism, or it can be, something against another group of people? Or what if there's multiple hates within these types of crimes? Discrimination, what does discrimination really look like? And, how can you identify and spot it right away? Same with bullying and harassment. And then, of course, probably the most personal is the perceptions that we have. We could get 100 different examples of the same city saying, oh, Brighton's never had a problem, it's the safest city I've ever been in, to, I think Brighton's very, I've had so many bad experiences, I really don't feel like this is a great, safe place. So we have this vast spectrum of things, but really what we do need to start bridging together are these pieces of the puzzle, so that we can actually shape and design for specific groups, but also understanding how we can continuously improve these. All right, so next slide. So the title of our, the title of this talk really does center around crowdsourcing. And crowdsourcing as something that, is a way to obtain information, whether it's for a particular task or project, by enlisting services of large numbers of people. Usually it's online where this has really taken shape, to really start to do things a lot more effectively, cheaply. So off the top of your head, and it doesn't have to be safety related, can you think of any examples of what crowdsourcing ideas or different businesses, how crowdsourcing has, I guess, been defined in your perspective?
Other examples, as in, of
Yes.
where we think.
Yeah.
So the one that springs to mind for me is Strava, with sort of running routes and.
Yeah, that's a great example. So do you want to break that down? So Strava is, everybody runs and then they.
And then, yeah, so then if they share their route that they think is great, and then people can high five it or comment, or then you've got access therefore to different options that you might not have tried before, and it's just kind of, it's quite a nice way to then try someone else's running route or cycle route or whatever it is.
Yes, absolutely. And we've had some
yeah,
comments.
We've got a couple more. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Brilliant. I wasn't sure if you could see them, Jillian. That's right. If you can see them, go ahead.
Okay. So we have TripAdvisor from Nigel. So that is an excellent example. TripAdvisor, if you want to elaborate, but TripAdvisor, different experiences, hotels, tourist destinations, people rate, and that is how businesses get starred and receive different benefits or get more marketing based on that information, usually positive versus negative. Wikipedia, Donna, that's a great one as well, that people are, this is probably one of the biggest crowdsourced projects that's open sourced, and that people can write about everything and other people peer review until kind of you're left with something people are happy with or will update along the way. Citizen science projects, not too sure if that's a specific group or if that's just something, Donna, that you've more like a hackathon or these different types of projects, or maybe it's a Brighton thing, I'm not too sure. Yes, GitHub, that is also another great example. So it's a repository for all the different code bases that people can collaborate on, whether it's private or public, but it is also a really great example. So some other ones that people might not come straight to mind are social media. I think, as Barnaby alluded to with the algorithms of Strava, there's also a lot of algorithms that are crowdsourced by different interactions within social media to determine what type of content gets shown. And I mean, whether that's all of us is right or wrong is a whole other conversation, but that's certainly a way that's crowdsourcing information. There's also a lot of big brands such as Coca-Cola and Lego that actually use crowdsourcing to design their next products. And I think Lego's had quite a number of success in being able to derive a lot of this information from their community. And then Amazon, Netflix, what kind of algorithms again are feeding into what kind of screenplay they might be looking at or movie that they'll produce themselves. So really, we're becoming to live in a world where there are so many more ways that we can crowdsource ideas, we can crowdsource business opportunities, we can crowdsource, different knowledge bases, as we've alluded to. So it's really exciting area, and I think it's probably, people get lost in the term, or the term isn't used as much there, but it is something that is kind of almost embedded in a lot of our different products. So could you click on the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
So again, going back to safety, we have these equal rights to safety that we've agreed on. And again, this is something that we agreed on after World War II on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everybody has the right to live, to be free, and to be safe. But again, in looking at that complexity of safety, how much of that do you think is true with even what's happened in 2020? I'll pause there to see if anyone has something to say. So Well, let me segue then into a video that I'd like to show you. This is my TEDx talk, Equality by Design. And it goes into a lot more detail about the founding story, the 200 cities I've traveled to, the similarities that I saw in a lot of different people that I interacted with, especially around safety and especially around sexual harassment. And this really helped lead me to create Safe in the City, and looking at how this crowdsourced information can start to accelerate things like equality, things like human rights and safety into our everyday technologies and everyday consumer behaviors so that we can move things along as fast as tech.
With great belief comes great responsibility. But how far has our belief in a fair, just, and equal world truly advanced us? Was it as you imagined when you were a child that every opportunity was ahead of you and that your ability to reach your potential would be based on your merit, passion, and drive to do so? Wasn't this what our parents and our grandparents worked so hard to leave behind for us? Humanity as a whole is rapidly progressing despite its hardships, especially over the past century. After the devastation of World War II, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Rights, recognizing the fundamental rights and freedoms of every man, woman, and child around the world. Yet, it was only in 2015 that the last country in the world, Saudi Arabia, gave women the right to vote. We've now entered into the information age, where about 50% of the world is connected to the internet. This has propelled radical social, environmental, and political changes. There is no doubt that there has been progress made, but then how does it compare to the rate that we're progressing in other areas, like technology? We are only a few years away from self-driving cars, but according to a report by Mercier, 217 years away from closing the gender pay gap. Are our time, energy, and resources truly invested in the things that we claim important to us? I'm lucky to have found my path to becoming an entrepreneur, which means sharing my dream with others, solving problems that matter to me, and surrounding myself with talented and supportive people. But how I arrived here started first by getting lost. And when I eventually found my way, this solidified my belief that now, more than ever, each one of us is capable of changing the world. It was a cold winter night when an ordinary walk led to an extraordinary idea. I was going to meet a friend in a vibrant part of London, using my navigation app to get me there. I was running late, wearing heels, tired from the commute, and just wanting to be there. I checked my navigation app, which showed me a route through a narrow, dark, and empty alleyway. A flash of fear rose, and my heart rate quickened, thinking, what if someone malicious appeared down this walk? The quickest route had put me through plenty of uncomfortable spaces before, so in a sense, I was used to challenging my intuition and adapting myself around these technologies. But about halfway down this walk, 2 kitchen staff appeared on a smoke break. They quickly noticed me, and I them, and trying not to be startled and keeping my pace ahead, I remember seeing in their eyes what little they thought about me. In a matter of seconds, they physically blocked my way and told me I was helpless should they want to sexually assault me right there. This wasn't the first time something like this has happened, nor will it likely be the last. So I was reminded about a time where I de-escalated it and felt confident I could probably escape. But before I tell you how I did, I want to share with you how the other paths in my journey were able to lead me to share my story with you. I was privileged to be born in Canada during a booming time for the oil and gas industry. After a few years after I was born, we moved to a very different country and place, one of the poorest countries of the world at the time, Yemen. This exposed me at a young age to a whole other identity, a way to look at myself and other cultures. We traveled frequently during our time there, which propelled my curiosity and insatiable love of people. So much so that my mother had to keep a close eye on me when I was young, as I had a habit of running up and hugging strangers just to make them feel happier. They were blissful times, with the desert and the rock piles as some of our favorite places to let our imaginations paint anything we wanted to on nearly blank canvases. But we were unaware of the cultural and political tensions soon to erupt. My childhood innocence was shed when the Civil War began, and I had my first experience of survival. The local airport was bombed, and the roads were unsafe because of the ceaseless gunfire. But we were lucky to escape in an overcrowded boat with hundreds of other refugees to Djibouti, and then later, my family to Canada. But even that brief encounter of war changed my life forever. I saw the other side of mankind, the destruction, the aggression, and the hate. Moving back to Canada, I felt displaced, even though I looked the part. I would think back and be haunted by these memories, the Yemeni people I loved and what kind of life they had to remain living in. This grew in me a sense of injustice about the inequalities around the world, and I questioned why we all had to act in a certain order or behave in a certain way when it felt like in a split moment it could all be gone. It wasn't a surprise years later when I selected psychology as my degree to study, because I wanted to better understand people and ways I could help them. But at 19, thinking I had a grasp of understanding of life, my mother, who'd been battling cancer since I was young, passed away. Only a month after that, my remarkable grandmother died in a tragic accident, leaving me feeling alone with no direction. I reverted back to my childhood years, traveling and living abroad. At the very least, I could be on an unstoppable quest to squeeze everything out of life before I died. Moving from country to country, job to job, paycheck to paycheck, relationship to relationship, took me on the most incredible journey. I got to experience the breadth of life and try out many versions of what it could look like with different types of people, cultures, work, and lifestyles, while coming to understand who I truly was. In a relatively short amount of time, I've been able to work in over 30 different industries, base myself in 7 countries, and travel to nearly 200 cities while making friends from all walks of life. And although this was an exceptional time, it was equally challenging. I had to grow up fast, be street smart, adaptable, sense who and who I could not trust. And as a young foreign woman, sometimes barely able to speak the native language, I was at a higher risk of experiences like sexual harassment and sexual assault. I became stronger from these experiences, and I held on to the belief that most people didn't realize the impact of their behaviors. But after hearing the painful stories from male and female friends, colleagues, classmates, even strangers, made this belief even harder, as it felt like there were very few untouched in some shape or form. But like many of my own experiences, I only shared them with the people that I trusted, as it was often better to minimize, bury, or hide these experiences, whether that was self-blame, shame, embarrassment, fear of retaliation, or escalation of an incident. But like their stories that changed us, they were in a sense invisible to the rest of the world, and therefore more difficult for preventing to other people. But I wanted to understand why. What was the common thread here? And what kind of solutions, especially around taboo topics, could start to address these epidemics in a faster way? This led me to London to study my master's in public health and epidemiology. In that alleyway, confronted by those two men, I stood my ground, did not break my gaze or show my fear. Their sexual threats ended up being empty and they let me pass. And as I ran out of the alleyway, their laughs and calls becoming more distant, I reached my friend to tell her what happened. She listened and sympathized, recalling her own experiences of being at the wrong place, the wrong time, and a victim of sexual harassment. But again, outside of this conversation, who would really know what happened to us? Or what difference would it really make if it was known? How many others would walk that same route, even that night? What if it was a young girl or a more vulnerable person who may not have been as lucky as me? I didn't want to stop traveling, having a positive view of others, or be haunted by the people left behind when this time there was something more I could have done. But as Sir Winston Churchill said, to try to be safe everywhere is to be strong nowhere. A light bulb moment happened, which merged my journeys together and pointed me to my North Star. I founded the company Safe in the City on a mission to becoming the world's most responsible data insights provider to enable the design of safer and smarter communities. We built a free navigation app to not only just look at the fastest routes, but safer ones. We equip people with information on crime, lighting, and others' experiences of harassment so they can inform their safety, be able to reach safe site locations if they need help, and also feel empowered that now their stories can start to impact the wider networks. In only a year since our launch, we've been able to make huge progress, capture thousands of these stories, create newfound partnerships, like with the Metropolitan Police, UN Women UK, and the Commonwealth Businesswomen's Network, so that their stories can also impact workplace environments, city planning, police intelligence, and national and international policies. When we can vote with our everyday movements, we can begin to lift the scale on the veil of these problems, identify and stay ahead of these trends, and feel empowered that it won't just affect our journey, but maybe someone else's on the other side of the world. The climate for acceptance on sexual harassment is changing. With the explosion of the #MeToo movement, Time's Up, and other high-profile cases in the media, the tip of the iceberg is beginning to surface. But building on the shoulders of everyday technologies unlocks the opportunity to do so much more. This UN Women's International Women's Day theme was innovation and technology to advance gender equality. A new day is on the horizon for technologies addressing issues of equality, as entrepreneurship with a purpose has the opportunity to be the great equalizer of our time. Tech for good shouldn't be a small subset of the digital revolution, as we need technology and social change to accelerate at the same rate. In order for humanity to survive, the solutions need to be as diverse and representative of the people, problems, and perspectives that we seek to change. We need more women in tech, more ethnicities, more abilities, more ages, balanced by human-centric businesses, impact investors, and socially conscious consumers. What if the tech unicorns of tomorrow looked more like black and white zebras, uncompromising on values for profit, because there's always a way to do both? I embarked on the most incredible journey of my life as an entrepreneur. As someone who knew very few people, having little resources, and much to learn about building a company. But it was an idea worth spreading, that through our everyday movements, we can progress equality. For those of you who have experienced or witnessed sexual harassment or sexual assault, report and share your experiences. to count on the difference it can bring to someone else's life journey. For the current and future entrepreneurs listening, build your product, team, and business around more than just a commercial gain, as changing the life of one person can never be seen as a failure. And let us all invest our time, energy, and resources towards equality, as we will not be able to thrive without it. Dreams can come true if your belief is as strong as your responsibility to follow through with them. It is with that I want to leave with you, that even in your darkest journeys, you can shine your light onto others and be the change you wish to see in the world.
It's Bonami. Hi. I watched your talk actually yesterday in preparation for today, and it was I was writing note after note, to be honest. So it was excellent. But I think what I suppose the main difference is the encounters that we have versus actually what then drove you to build a company on the back of it. So I think it's yeah, you sort of rather humbly stepped through the patch, that part in a sense, because you've built something on the back of it. But I think, you know, many of us might aspire to do that, but maybe not get there.
Well, hopefully this talk can help inspire you to, you know, see from your perspective, because also, again, part of this is really, you know, in how tech and a lot of the world has been designed, which I'll get into in a little bit.
Jillian,
really,
sorry.
Yeah, please.
Just very quickly, if you covered 200 cities, that's a range of different cultures.
Yes.
And cultural adaptations of technology. Have you seen some huge differences, way that this has been embraced, or, you know, are certain cultures just more accepting of the fear that is out there because that's part of their, you know, us in the lovely UK are relatively safe in comparison. So how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, you know, I guess a lot of my travel wasn't when we were as connected. It was probably, you know, 10 years ago or so that I really spent all of my 20s traveling and living abroad. So I've lived in 9 countries. But as I mentioned, I had to count for this talk. It was over 200 cities that I'd been able to travel through. I basically dedicated that part of my life to figuring out what is it I'm supposed to be doing, and trying to live and enjoy and try out new things as I exploring that question. And certainly technology has advanced. And one of the, I think, precursors, which I don't talk about here, is especially as a public health researcher, I was based in Uganda, and we were working with young people on HIV, who were living with HIV and needing to be connected to the healthcare system. And, you know, 18-year-olds Ugandans, like they had phones. Like not all of them were smartphones, although we are seeing a surge of even developing countries having access to these phones and, you know, connectivity in different areas. But people still wanted to be connected by their phones, even if it was SMS based. So actually what I found in my research there was that we really did need to start looking at technologies as an intervention to help connect these youth into the healthcare system. Otherwise they disengage, and then they're, you know, lost in terms of the medical care, as well as the kind of epidemiology risks associated with that. So that was kind of one of the sparks. And, you know, when I was speaking to different professors at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, it just felt it was this, well, technology, it's just this kind of, it's a business, and it's something we just don't understand. So let's just not get into it. Let's just kind of keep using the tools and methods that we've, you know, shown to work. And while I completely agree that we still need these different robust plethora of different scientific and research tools, we also do need to start looking at advancing in terms of technology. And I think that was where this curiosity came while I moved into London and started to look at the tech products that I was using in a different way. And again, with public health, it's really less around kind of reacting in a situation, and it's looking at that more preventative lens. So that was why the navigation versus the safety, personal safety app kind of came into place, because, you know, calling the police or panicking to friends or, you know, these types of things are very much, you know, kind of the point where it's a little bit too late, versus kind of going upstream and looking at what are the environmental factors, what have other people experienced, like what are maybe have the police known about, and being able to start putting that all together by having people actually continuously contribute to that and benefit from, you know, the information that is provided. But as you said, there's still a long ways to go in terms of that global equity or equality, and, you know, people's different perceptions. We launched, for example, in Berlin last year, and there is a very, because of their history, especially around surveillance, there's a very sensitivity around technology, having any access to anyone's information, and, you know, this kind of very slow and approach to actually being modernized to the same extent. Even a lot of people don't have credit cards and things like that, like it's cash based, and just some very interesting things. So even within a Western culture or European, there are a lot of differences. So I think that's kind of the exciting part of the next chapter. But did that answer your question, Dan, or?
Yeah, in a much wider field, so thank you.
Great. All right, well, let's get into it. Barnaby, are the slides still?
I will share again.
Great. And do reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'll have my contact details as well if you do want to, you know, carry on this conversation. Great, this is perfect. So as I've alluded to, there is a lot of information out there. Even in the last, I think, few years, we've accelerated the amount of information collected. But again, there's a huge data gap that is existing, whether it's between gender, ethnicity, sexuality, or religion, disability, age. There's a lot of this is actually distancing versus kind of trying to bring us back together. So I want to get into a little bit of that. Could you go to the next slide? So this, again, becomes a massive problem when we start to look at different risk groups in terms of safety and their decision-making process in that. And it really perpetuates the problem because we don't have the information to represent it. So in a sense, we remain invisible from these politicians, these policing, intelligence procedures, other institutions that are really, we've put a lot of trust that they have sorted this for us, or we can rely that it's there when we need it and is working in our favor. And again, when we start to consider, most of us don't fit into only one of these buckets. We fit into a plethora, or we know a lot of people who fit into a plethora of these different groups that, again, these start to complicate and muddy the picture. And in this book, I highly recommend, and I've been very privileged to speak to Caroline in a little bit more detail about her book. But this is, again, focusing on women and gender. But this Invisible Women's book really starts to evidence this issue across different, not only technology and mobility, but also healthcare and different health standards, government, workplace, pay gaps, leadership. And the point is not to, point the finger and go, hey, all of these, Western men who have historically been in power are to blame. It's really to just recognize the issues that have been built in and are continuing to exacerbate the problem, so that we actually don't put our loved ones at risk, because in this book, again, she talks about nobody wants their mother to not be diagnosed with a heart attack, because females have a different symptom base, but that's not what the doctor's knowledge base is based on, because of the research has been predominantly done on male patients with heart attacks. And this, again, she gets into a lot more detail around mobility, and again, women's experiences specifically around different times of day that they need to travel for different care, or even potentially more kind of nighttime cares, especially with single mothers or more disadvantaged groups who might be having to work through nighttime economy hours. And it's, yeah, really highly recommended book, but it also helps us evidence things from kind of our perspective. And again, we're looking at how we can shape and bridge that. So let's get into Safe in the City a little bit more. So really what we're setting out to do is very ambitious, but ultimately we want to become the world's most responsible data insights provider and enable the design of smarter and safer cities. So thank you. So as I mentioned, we kind of build into this and exploring these different conversations, is that safety is universal. It is something that all of us want, we desire, we want for our loved ones, but it also is unique to us about the experiences we had, especially someone just mentioned about a crime that they experienced a couple of months ago. There's residual experiences that also carry forward with us, and again, we can't walk in everyone's shoes, but we do now have technology that can start to supplement this information, as well as contributing to this aggregate understanding of how do we design these spaces to be more representative of our needs and keep people safer. So I'd like to actually, sorry, Barnaby, I'm gonna just pause for a quick discussion break. Because I'd like, again, if we could talk a little bit about examples from your life and experiences that aren't fully visible. So I think, 2020 has been very insightful with the Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd. We've had the Me Too movement that was, not too long ago, with celebrities and obviously a lot of other people. And Trans Lives Matter, there's been a lot of visibility. So I would really like to open it up to understand, what are some of the thoughts or conversations that you're having regarding different groups' needs of safety and security, or personally stories of your own?
Do feel free to come off mute, obviously, and show cameras.
Yes, please.
I don't know if it's hi.
Hi.
I always think it's quite interesting around sort of how young people can be demonized sometimes, actually. I think that's quite an interesting one, and you can hear it even now with the conversations about COVID, almost like that fear of young people being irresponsible and partying and disregarding the safety of their elders and all that sort of stuff. I think that's just been quite an interesting dimension, because I think you definitely pick up that on the street, that young people being treated with suspicion, which is just awful, really, isn't it? Very sort of sad. But
I think that's a great group, age really factoring into that, and as something that I feel like we're probably quite a ways off of really recognizing how much that impacts, like ageism really impacts how we view and stereotype and perceive risk. I think that's a great group to mention. Anyone else? No? Well, let's carry on. We can always come back to if you have something else that you've thought of. So again, in terms of, thanks, next slide. So in terms of, I think this actually does go into a little bit of the youth conversation. So one national survey showed in the UK that 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK, 85% of women had experienced sexual harassment in only a year time frame. So, and there's another survey done in Stanford, but there's been replications of that in different European studies that 67% of girls under 14 had experienced some form of sexualization or sexual harassment. So this becomes part of the problem, especially when we look at that. According to, again, another study, this is a Transport for London, that 90% of these remain unreported. So it becomes a cumulative problem that over people's lifetime, there's this existence of this problem that does impact their feelings of safety, security, mental health, a number of other kind of risk behaviors that we don't quite understand, but the impacts as well as kind of the consequences into that. So this is, again, an area that we're very much interested in targeting and being able to understand the complexity, but also how we can actually amass this information through crowdsourcing and working alongside different partners to actually address it. So yeah, next slide. So let me tell you a little bit more about Safe in the City. And we've been evolving our product, especially during COVID, with a lot more emphasis on the reporting functionality versus navigation, since a lot of us are not traveling into new spaces. We're very much a little bit more close to home. And we've maintained seeing quite high levels of reports and less so kind of journeys taken with Safe in the City. But our real aim is through Safe in the City's technology, which I'll get into, our mobile app technology, into the I3, which is our Insights, Impact, and Influence program. But ultimately how we want to advance positive progress in these areas so that, again, we're working alongside the community, we're representing their voices, and we're able to make sense of the complexities of these experiences to actually design these spaces alongside other partners as we're moving through them. So let me walk you through what Safe in the City does. And we very much want to be in Brighton, and I'll tell you a little bit more towards the end of how we're trying to do that. Just next slide. You can skip to the next one. Great. So the app itself, again, from my experience of using a navigation app, that was kind of the application that I feel like most people have on their phone. They know how to use it, but it becomes a very important thing as we're moving through different spaces to understand the risks that we have and, again, the perceptions and incidents that we experience. So we want to make sure that everyone's informed. And I think, again, even going into this day and age with fake news, we really want to make sure that people are getting credible, official information as much as possible to be able to get that information to their devices. So I think I do get on to how we do that a little bit later. So next slide. And ultimately, we want to have people feel empowered that they can discreetly report these experiences. So we've structured this information when people do report, and you can report it in the time or report it afterwards. We've kept that fairly open so that people can make the decision whenever they feel that they would like to report it. And we've structured this based on a traffic light system so that the crimes that we know that the police collect information on, such as sexual assault, gets flagged and, you know, I guess prioritized to a certain degree with that kind of criminal association attached. And then we have so we have a number of the different crimes that people can report on. And then we also have kind of the yellow amber, where it is a lot more of the verbal and nonverbal. And that is the majority of what makes up Safe in the City, because we also do encourage people to call the police. We do have an SOS button should people need to get to the police, which we've, I think to date, connected over, I think it was, I don't want to quote myself actually on that, but it was quite a outstanding number that is quite shocking. And we also leave a free text area so that people can share a little bit more around the contextual side of this. And again, I'll go into a little bit of a campaign that we're running right now from one of the most used and kind of dangerous words, as we've classified it, because of kind of how, again, these other experiences have been built on each other. So this is all anonymous. We don't collect demographic information. We prioritize people's privacy first, so that, again, it's more about the information, the output that we can use versus who are you, where do you go, where do you live, and that type of information. So next slide. And then finally, we do have the rating of the journey. So if you're walking or taking public transit, you can actually score the route based on your perceptions of safety. And this is something that we designed alongside some criminologists that were working in London. And these are some of the survey tools that they use in local authority areas. Of course, the survey is a lot more robust, and within an app and the UX, we have to make it very, user-friendly and kind of quick. But this helps inform, again, kind of the local authorities and the processes that they already use, which is another important point of kind of how we help use crowdsourced information in a non-siloed way. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the interesting things. And we also just published earlier this year with UN Women, who were able to successfully have London sign up as one of their Safe Cities for Women and Girls program after this report. So Safe in the City, as I mentioned, mostly has verbal harassment. That's one of the most common forms. I didn't mention that we do also have an environmental. So in the traffic light system, we have a green, which is more around the environmental forms of harassment, such as taking photos. So we also noticed that incidents, unlike most people who think maybe this is something that only happens at night and when you're all by yourself, we actually were able to show that through our information, incidents actually happen during peak commuting times. So there was actually an association with busy times and more people being around with different forms of sexual and street harassment. And then again, unfortunately, we've had 1 in 4 report sexual assaults on our application. So this is still quite a startling number, but it is something that we feel very privileged that, again, we're working alongside police and different authorities, that we at least capture this information so that we can help design and understand people's experiences. So this is the kind of quantitative side. And again, that kind of notion that we can only change what happens. We can only change when we measure things. And I think that's, again, an important point that we want to bring forward. Thank you. Next slide. So really, with a mixed methodology, or combining the power of qualitative and quantitative information, we can also extract from that free-form text what types of experiences, words, threats, risk categories are being mentioned within them. And we have seen a lot of intersectionality come between it. So, maybe a whistle will then carry on into an actual assault, or a racist comment could then turn sexualized as a sexual threat. We've seen lots of information about young people, like of school children in uniforms. And again, these are very important points that if we just had someone reporting that they were sexually, they were touched, they were groped, we might not actually understand that this is probably someone under the age, because now they have the opportunity to share that they were in a school uniform, or a bystander was able to share that, which we do cater for both bystanders and direct experiences. So next slide. So again, I think one of the opportunities that I hope to leave with you is that having a very intersectional background is important to come at problems from different perspectives. And I think with working more in public health and working more with complex stakeholders, we were able to establish one of the first relationships with the Metropolitan Police to make sure that the information that we're receiving is plugged back into the authorities to also be able to shape that. And again, we're receiving information that can help get people alerted to crises such as the London Bridge attacks, which we alerted our users about within 10 minutes, so people don't accidentally go into these areas that the police also don't want people to be going into. So yeah, we're very lucky to have started that. One of our early team members was a retired police officer, so that helped us really shape it around kind of crime and safety. So next slide. So a lot of people ask, well, how the heck do you operate as a business then, or as a social enterprise? And how do we actually work with businesses? And again, I think this is also a key distinguishing point in that, when there is that work with businesses, then, and we can unlock a business opportunity, then there's going to be a lot more people jumping into this to not only create a business opportunity, but to actually impact a social issue. So next slide. So this is a bit of a rough roadmap of what we're doing and working on, and we're really excited that within this year we will be launching our risk API to also help other technologies be provided with this information that we receive, so that they can get risk scorings out to their users, or emerging crises. And that's essentially what Safe in the City, our app is. It's definitely not Google Google Maps. We don't have a few billion to throw at it. We're still a very early stage company. But being able to take what we've learned and demonstrate it, and through those powerful partnerships, take that information and take those integration opportunities to other products, so that if you were on a date on Tinder, or using Strava to go for a run, or on another in an Uber, that actually you could receive this information. And what we later want to build out is a standardized way to start reporting on these different types of personal safety incidents. We want to evolve these insights into impact, and that is something that we are actually crowdfunding for, to do our MVP with charities and nonprofits, which is essentially a way of how we can take that information coming through the app or through the other applications to, again, at an aggregate level, understand what are the types of concerns people have, what types of incidents are happening, what are the perceptions of these, and how are they changing over different times and spaces, and maybe products themselves. And we really want people to be invested in being able to influence by making a measurable and demonstrable difference. And that is something I'll speak to a little bit later on in some of the work we're doing with Uber. So next slide. I guess I kind of give this away a little bit before, but again, one of our kind of unfortunate but fortunate events that, you know, we were able to alert people was the London Bridge attacks, and being able to push this information to people's devices so that they knew that they should not be traveling into that area because of this incident. So that's, again, part of the incident flagging that we do, being able to push information to different devices and independently verify whether this is kind of a real report or a fake report. So that's quite an important thing.
Jillian, sorry.
Yes, please.
There's a question that's popped up from
Oh, yes.
So she says, is it easier to get help from a bystander when it's a busier time? And I've got a question as well. I'd like to.
Oh yeah, please. Wow, that's a really good question, Nigel. Like, in theory, yes, I think it should be easier to get a bystander when there's more people around. But I think, you know, one of these things is, again, people not wanting to risk their own safety to intervene with someone else. I know, especially through our work with women, that a lot of, especially young women, don't feel comfortable to step in or to kind of get out of a situation. So often it just, again, doesn't get reported. It gets internalized in a lot of ways, and often does become something of a behavior change in usually a negative sense, and that maybe someone doesn't feel comfortable to go to the train station without someone coming picking them up, or, you know, having to change how they dress or express themselves in different ways. So there are a number of different bystander training courses. As I mentioned at the beginning, Hollerback is one of the largest, and interesting enough, L'Oreal Paris as a brand has actually taken light to street harassment, and they've committed to, I believe, as 1 million people to be trained in bystander intervention, so that we do get better at recognizing what are these different types of behaviors, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's racism, whether it's you know, disability, hate crime. We can start to be able to go into this. But again, logging that information is also valuable, so that, you know, we can look at, understand, you know, are these happening at certain times? Like what are the other factors that might be heading into that? But yeah, Dan, do you have a question too?
I do. I really like this. Well, not sorry about the London stabbings. The fact you were able to alert people.
Yeah.
And that sounded really badly. I didn't.
We say that a lot. We're like, "Yay, we got no, it's bad," but yeah.
It's terrible. Obviously, it's terrible. Is there a risk though? The fact that you're alerting people, you're actually driving awareness of the situation, which would make almost the rubberneckers next to a, you know, when there's a road accident, people actually swamp to the scene, as opposed to what you intend to do is to keep them away from that situation.
Yeah, it's, again, another you know, interesting thing, and really important when you are looking at technologies at scale, to consider these different unintended consequences. And I think, you know, at least kind of our perception is that, especially if it's specific to devices, like ours is navigation based, like if you're potentially going to be traveling through that area, that personalization piece, I think, is important, which we haven't yet kind of cracked. Like, we did alert people within that area or had traveled in and out of those different places. But as you said, you know, we can't necessarily control people's behaviors of what they do with that information afterwards. But I think, you know, at least from our perspective, I think most people are well-intentioned, and that wouldn't be the volume of people's response to go, "Oh, great, terrorist attack, I'm gonna go, you know, take a selfie by it," or something. You know, they'd probably be like, "Wow, I really want to stay away from that area and get my family away," or, you know, like that. I think we do need to kind of go back to what we believe most people will do if we can empower them with information. But it is also an important thing to make sure that, you know, we're weighing up those consequences for public alert.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'll jump off again. Thank you.
Thanks for the great questions. Yes, so next slide, Barnaby. Great, so as I mentioned, kind of some of the insights through the integration and the application that we've already received information on, and then being able to pull that into kind of impact reporting. So like, what are the concerns and trends over these areas? What are the geographies and times that these are spiking in? And then it moves into kind of, now that you have this visibility of the issue, what can you actually do with it? And we've started to design a knowledge base of this information, and working again in partnership with some other organizations such as Uber, so that actually safety can be part of your living brand, especially if it is something that you are moving people through different spaces. It really is an important thing to make sure people feel safe on your platforms, especially now that we're getting a lot more connected on our devices into physical spaces. What is the responsibility of these tech providers in making sure that that experience is actually safe? And we really see that this influence of, being able to, look at, how are these organizations comparing to one another is an important part of that kind of influence. Like, how does that ethos live and breathe throughout your organization of capturing information and making not only maybe product decisions, business decisions, but also social impactful decisions. All right, so smarter cities are safer cities. And I think a lot of the conversations around smart cities are quite ambiguous to a certain degree, or looking at a lot of automation procedures of IoT, like how can we alert that this trash can's full and get someone over to do that? But again, that algorithm and that design is really not representative of the people who live in such a dynamic city as Brighton or in London. So we actually need them to be smarter by engaging people. And that's where kind of we'll unlock how we actually create these spaces where people could feel free to walk and travel and dress how they like, and, do things within a, obviously, like, a fashion that is respectful and safe for other people. But that's really, I think, where we will unlock that real opportunity of smart cities. So next slide. So again, we've been really proud in the last couple of years. We launched in 2018, as I mentioned in my TED Talk, of what kind of organizations that we are working with. And again, that's something that we also unlock through this partnership model, in that, it isn't our information to own and possess, and let's have someone else do the exact same thing so that they can, do it their way. It has to become a network effect that, everyone's benefiting. There is an economic kind of incentive, but there's also a social incentive to be doing the right thing. So next slide. So we've, here are some of the partners that we've been working on. And again, front and center of that is really the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and what our technology and our the way that we conduct our business is really aiming to achieve. So next slide. So as I said to you at the beginning, I really hope that this conversation really brought out that, new perspectives coming in and being aligned towards a higher purpose and kind of focus is really how we actually become this unstoppable force for good. And I really think that there's a new horizon, a new day on the horizon for technologies that are addressing equality, that we're starting to see a lot more businesses not just kind of pay lip service to these important issues, even including, racism or gender pay gap. We're starting to see demonstrable numbers and that transparency to verify that. And really that solutions do need to be as diverse and representative of the people, problems, and perspectives that we seek to change. So really looking at how we can bring more women into data, more ethnicities, ages, abilities, and balance that by human-centric behaviors, impact investing, and socially conscious consumers. Because then we can, again, unlock this next level that I think we're very much looking ahead to achieve. So next slide. So how you can get involved, our one slogan is that there's no progress without movement. So again, let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing here. So we've just launched this Most Dangerous Word is Just campaign. And as I alluded to before, on our free text, one of the most common words was just. And just being a word that minimizes often these experiences, it reduces people's willingness or desire or knowledge to report these types of incidents. It really blocks people from getting help that they might need in these different types of unsafe experiences. And it may also impact bystanders getting involved when we're normalized to these types of experiences of street and sexual harassment. So we are currently crowdfunding on crowdfunder platform as part of the Mayor of London's Pay It Forward. And we're really excited that we are working with a number of different nonprofit and charitable partners, including the Women's Equality Party, to also have them receive these dashboard and reports of their specific areas and be able to report to us what they're seeing, what they're doing with this type of aggregate information, and what measurable change have they noticed, so that, again, we can take that into our knowledge base, into our clientele, and be able to publish information about what seems to be working, what are the key problem areas, and how can we actually sustainably continue to progress on them. So I do hope and encourage you to have a look at that. I can send, if you follow me online, you'll see it everywhere probably. And that is something too that we're very excited to move into Britain, because part of our technology is that we want the information to actually make meaningful change in local communities. And there's no better way than partnering with people who are already doing these great projects from different diverse perspectives on kind of different target groups to make these changes and, again, kind of have us move into those spaces quicker. So we really hope that Brighton will be next on our list. And again, not that there's, there is always going to be issues that we don't see, and bringing that visibility to see it and to make it better is part of that important step. So yeah, finally, this is how you can connect with us. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're now on YouTube. We do live streams with some really amazing people from actually all over the world now. Especially talking about street and sexual harassment, which is our primary focus right now. And yeah, you can get in touch with me on LinkedIn too, quite active on there. Visit our website if you'd like to learn more about our risk APIs or the app itself. I failed to mention, but you can also report on our website, which is global, and we have actually received reports from all over the world. It's just the application right now that's London and Berlin based, but as I mentioned, we're hoping to change that. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I'd really welcome any questions, comments, concerns. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jillian. That was excellent. That was really insightful and yeah, fascinating to get a sort of behind the scenes perspective as well. I think it's always interesting to hear your story, but also see it in action a bit as well. Would anyone like to kick off the questions? Dan?
I will. This is fascinating stuff. Thank you. So 2 questions, if I may. Right. You're going to have access to a huge amount of data. There are data can be used for amazing good, but it can also be made or used for amazing bad. What do you think the biggest risk is?
Mm.
We're dealing with young women's potential safety.
Mm-hmm.
If that data is hijacked, or I don't want to be a naysayer, but I'm just genuinely fascinated by having control of all of this information. If that gets into the wrong hands, yes.
So, I mean, ultimately, we're actually data processors versus controllers of that information, aside from our own product. But as you said, like, I think cybersecurity is a very important thing of like who's tapping into that. We actually just had a cybersecurity advisor join our board, so we're really happy that we have that insight just continuing to develop as we grow. But you know, I think what's important is really to be aware of these risks and continuously monitor and, you know, improve on those potential risks. I think, you know, what we're trying to do, especially with the dashboard, is bring that transparency to the forefront so that, you know, it doesn't become, we can, you know, identify these are the devices that these people, like that people have actually reported on these things, and we can bring that back to kind of this is why this report at the aggregate level is showing the spike, for example. And when we can also you know, look at the, again, how does mobility and public transit, and have, you know, these organizations who have to have safety and compliance coming through them, and we work with those authorities to make sure that that is actually following and abiding by those regulations. Then I think that's how we've kind of tried to balance not just the commercial and private arm, but how do we make sure that public government and policymakers and local you know, charities are also have the ability to see and act on that information, so it becomes a lot more visible for other people to govern these things. And to the same extent, you know, if an organization is really not acting, they're like, well, we have this, but we just are going to ignore it, that, you know, that marketplace opportunity to be like, well, you're going to be, you know, left in the dust by not advancing on looking at how do, you know, how do women experience an Uber drive, or how does, you know, different minority or ethnic groups, like, do they get treated differently, or how does that factor into their safety? So I think there is this turning tide, but as you said, like, we certainly, we don't know all of the risks and problems and ahead of us, so we have to be really mindful of that.
Thank you. And then on a more positive note, have you come across the City Gal Network?
City Gal, no.
No, City. I'll send you a link, but it's a community of young women. I think there's 25,000 members based in different countries around the world. Wow. So if you're a young lady that moves to New York, you've got no friends, you don't know where to go, and they help each other out. So I'm just thinking, if you're trying to launch in Brighton, they're based here, but they have a huge European and worldwide network. You really need to speak to them. So
wonderful.
I'll send you some details.
Perfect. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, we can only know so much about those areas. And I think, again, that connects and ignites people as, you know, they want their cities and loved ones to be safe. So we've really had so many opportunities to move, you know, pull in every direction, and South Africa to India to, you know, Poland, and it's quite extraordinary. But as you said, it's really tapping into that local knowledge that we can actually make a difference.
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy between what you're doing. So I'll let somebody else ask some questions.
And I was wondering if it feels like users are sort of, unfortunately, suffer a harassment and then find the app as a result, or do you think people are sort of proactively downloading it in the hope that they're not having to report? Do you see what I mean? There's a sort of, are you reactive or proactive, I suppose, in terms of new members? Do you know that even into how is that data going?
So, I mean, to date, almost all of our I would say the majority of our marketing has been through word of mouth, through different events that we've done, through networking events, through different, kind of women's groups or different kind of groups, and then being connected into them. So I would say that, predominantly actually our user base is a little bit older. I would say, not really, but 25 to kind of 35. And what we've hypothesized and ran some focus groups is that seems to be an age where there does maybe become an appreciation of this isn't going to end. It's not just a uni problem. It's not just a young person going out problem. It can happen in the workplace. It can happen on the train to work. It can, happen at, a family member's house. Like it really starts to maybe get a bit exhausting of this isn't going to be a problem going away anytime soon. And also that kind of what we've also seen, especially around sexual assaults and reporting, is that people are a lot more likely to report if they think that that report will help prevent someone else from going through that experience. So I think that also is an important thing. And a little bit, again, not quite old, but older adults that are wanting to make sure that this isn't going to happen to kind of the younger generation and continue on in that way. So yeah, but we do hope through kind of a lot more of our work and partnerships that, again, we can reach a lot more people. And I think the sad reality of those statistics is that, especially around, street and sexual harassment, is that it's very common experience. So it's quite uncommon to kind of speak with someone who's like, I've never had someone sexualize me or comment or call me something. And that's actually one of the things we're working on with the Member of Parliament, Stella Creasy, is the misogyny as a hate crime bill, because that seems to be one of the gaps in the hate crime, in that there's racial hate crime and disability and religious hate crime and trans and homophobia hate crimes, but there's not actually a gender-based hate crime for women, whereas we know a lot of evidence of sexual and physical violence is certainly not really painting the picture that it is not a thing. So, but yeah, sorry, hopefully that answers your question.
Well, there was a study, I don't know, the survey recently through TikTok and Facebook, I think it was. I think it was reported, I think, in an Australian article that I read, but about to women, what would you do if you had 24 hours on Earth without men? Did you see that?
I saw that.
And
yeah.
basically they would walk at night and feel safe, which actually is slightly against the data that you have, because in fact it's at more commuter daily times. But I think your own perception is, I wouldn't want to go out at night and walk. Yeah,
certainly. And again, there's so many economic implications to that, in that, women may have to leave the nightclubs or the bars earlier because they're just not feeling safe. And that's information that, bars may not have access to or an understanding of, or again, women might have to spend more money on these types of, transportation or taxi, like to get around, to try to mitigate those types of perceptions and risks, and stories or experiences that they've had. So again, in that Invisible Women book, really fantastic how she's been able to kind of start to piece together across the world all this information of these consequences. And again, there is a market opportunity within that, if people believe in seeing that safety and diversity and representation of different people's needs is a huge priority of how they run a great business.
Caroline was due to speak at the Old Market in Brighton, actually, but then lockdown hit, and sadly it's obviously been postponed, but she'll be back, I'm sure.
Yeah, great.
Does anybody else have any other questions or would like to share any thoughts or comments? No, all good. Oh yeah, go ahead, Nigel. Hi.
Yeah, I'd like to ask what else you do with your data. Obviously, certain things are really self-evident. I'm trying to escape from teaching. I'm retraining as a data scientist, and there's some amazing stuff you can do with data, training machines to look for really, really specific combinations of lots and lots of different factors that a human couldn't spot. So apart from the obvious things like that there is on a one dimension that there are peak hours, have you explored what your data set can actually show you?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you said, if you're studying data science, like you can just keep unearthing more and more, especially with open data sources, or augmenting it with other data sets becomes kind of more available. We are actually moving into machine learning and identifying a lot more of the reports coming in. We have kind of set that more of the natural language processing so that we can actually understand, again, a lot more of the intersections of risk. And then that, I guess, it doesn't give us specific demographic information, but it does uncover, you know, if I was to experience a racial experience, you know, it is likely that I'm from a BAME community in, you know, the UK, for example, or if I've been sexually assaulted. Again, that's not to say that men don't get sexually assaulted, but the vast majority. And again, within that free text, there might be more information that we can understand that people are willing to share about their gender, for example. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're working on. And then of course, you know, later on that kind of more predictive and models kind of coming through to see like what types of risk could we anticipate with the, you know, police information and the reports of street and antisocial behavior going to, you know, a football match, or going into these types of areas. And then again, how can we create product features as well as, you know, physical interventions through those communities to actually be able to measure, has there been a before or after change, and what's worked, what hasn't, and really start to interrogate that. But great field of choice. You won't be a shortage of jobs there.
Yeah, good move. Any other questions from anybody? No? Well, I think that brings it to a close then. I'll just share my screen and close up. I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to Jillian. That was excellent, really insightful. And I think that the work you're doing, I think it touches us all in some way. So I'm sure we'll all now be ambassadors and can hopefully spread the word. Just on a couple more notes about DRIVA Arts DRIVA. So a couple of upcoming events. You can find these on the website if you want to go and have a look. There's a number of different events. Nigel, I'm sure you'll be interested now in your new course of learning. And yeah, please check out the website, do subscribe if you haven't already, register so that you get event alerts. And thank you, Jillian. Good to hear from you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. And I've just put my LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect on the chat.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Take
Lots
care.
of thank yous from everyone.
Stay safe.